There's a market and profit to be made in using a similar technology as gene manipulation to be able to create children that are designer because you want him to be smarter, faster, handsome, she to be beautiful, attractive, articulate.
Then as a parent, you're not necessarily loving your kid for who your kid is with all his or her flaws, etc., but you're loving this menu.
Your creation.
Right.
Your creation. They passed what's called the Medical Care for the Dying Act, and it basically is a euthanasia bill. It is assisted suicide.
So it's not actually medical care.
It's couched that way, but it's actually not. So ordinarily speaking, when in vitro fertilization occurs, many times, because it is so expensive and because people are really trying to have children in this way, a number of eggs are fertilized. Only a few are implanted in the uterus of a mother. So the question is, what happens with the rest of them? Everyone that is fertilized is the beginning of human life. It is human life. It's a human person. It's very first stages of life. And the practice that has occurred is that for many, they're just disposed of, which is abortive. That's abortion. But for some, they're actually frozen. So what are we doing in the end? What we're doing in the end is playing God.
Okay, here we go. This is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. I'm Steve Lee, and it is my great pleasure, as always, to introduce Bishop Frank Caggiano.
Steve, it's good to see you, my friend. We have a crisis. I lost my glasses.
Oh, no.
Okay. I can't see a blasted thing.
Oh, my goodness.
So I'm hoping there's a spare. I already lost one pair. I had 3 pairs. Right? So now I lost the second. I have to find the last one, which I think I know where it is, but it's not anywhere like accessible. So I'm fully prepared for our recording. Just for the record, for everyone on earth, they know.
So these are prescription, not just readers.
No, they're prescription.
Can you drive?
Vaguely. Vaguely. Yes. They're for up close, not for distance.
Okay. Oh, good. All right. So we don't have to warn anybody.
No,
don't be on the roads at this time.
No, we don't have to do any of that stuff.
Oh, well, I'm sorry that you lost your glasses.
That's all right, though. It happens to the living.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. But I said to Debbie, who's my assistant, I said, I really do have to just take a few days and just lay low. Because last night I went to bed and I totally forgot. I have an electric oven that I left one of the pot. What do you call those things on?
Oh my gosh!
So I get up at 1 a.m. to have a glass of water. And I'm thinking to myself, why is it so hot?
Oh my word!
Yeah.
So
it was on simmer. But it was. I thought to myself, that's a sign of dementia. Wow, that's not
good. No, it's a sign that you need to take a proper vacation, Excellency,
Yes.
which it sounds like you have not been doing.
No. So now we're going to do it right now after this.
Okay. Good.
So actually, I thought to myself, there's some very interesting things going on that we should talk about and alert our listeners to, because they could have potentially a very profound effect, some positive, some negative. And it's all in front of us in the news, but because the news comes so fast and furious with so many different things,
right,
that sometimes some of these more positive things can get lost. So, for example, in the bill that was just signed into law on Independence Day, the ECCA was passed, the Educational Choice for Children's Act.
Okay.
And it is part of this huge reconciliation bill, which I think is like 1,800 pages. But it's an historic first for the federal government, because for the first time, the federal government is going to give tax credits for those who give money to scholarship offering entities for children to attend the schools of their choice. And we have been looking for that for almost 40 years. And many states have vouchers and they have other things that support school choice. But many of the states in our neck of the woods, in the Middle Atlantic states and in New England, they do not exist.
Right.
So this is a federal law that provides that. And so I think we should just pause to recognize there are a group of individuals who have lobbied for this for a long time. Many of them live in our diocese and in the Archdiocese of New York, among other places. They've spent a tremendous amount of time, tremendous amount of their own resources to try to convince, and they did, enough of the legislators to put this into the bill. So, first and foremost, I want everyone to realize that we've crossed an historic moment. And it should be of great benefit to Catholic schools, particularly in the states where we have no state aid, which is like Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, what does the bill say? So, it says that individual taxpayers can take a maximum tax credit, a credit on their taxes of $1,700 per year if they give money to charitable organizations that offer scholarships to poor children. And that would begin in 2027.
Hmm.
And there's also no cap in the tax deduction for those sort of donations beyond the 1,700. So if you gave, I don't know, 10,000, you could get a tax credit for the first 1,700, and the rest you could get a tax deduction, and then you would be able to get a tax credit. And I think it's extremely important for people to know that, because I'm hoping people who, have some means or are
Mm-hmm.
older can now consider giving, because in effect, the federal government is helping us along the way. I think the other piece to this provision that's really historic is that there is no cap on the amount of tax credits that can be given. So let's say 100 million people decided to do this and they gave, I don't know, $17 billion. There is no cap. The former versions of this had caps, but this does not. And therefore, what's interesting is you may say, oh, so this is poor people. So these are poor children. But the bill actually defines poverty in a very interesting way. It defines it with median income. And so, for example, here in Connecticut, if you were to look at like Hartford and Milford and New Haven, that area, right?
Mm-hmm.
The median income for a family of four is $121,000. So people who are eligible for scholarships their families must earn three times less that. So it's three times 121,000 still makes you eligible. So if your family makes $250,000, you would still be eligible for a scholarship if an
Hmm.
organization granted it to you,
Okay.
right? So that kind of levels the playing field with working class and even middle class families who sometimes struggle with everything else they have to do to send
Yes.
their children to schools of their choice, particularly in this case, Catholic schools. The one negative in this, and why I'm raising it, is because in the version that passed, governors have the ability, or are required, if I may put it this way, to opt into the program. So a governor can choose to opt out, which then disenfranchises everyone in his state.
Right.
So in those states that have been hostile to any sort of aid to private schools, uh, that is going to be somewhat of an obstacle. And therefore, those who are listening, particularly you and I who live in Connecticut, we have to give thought on how we could advocate to Governor Lamont that this is extremely important. And the
Yeah.
credit is coming from the federal government. It's not coming from the state government. So that he would opt in on an annual basis, as every other governor should be advocated for, lobbied to opt into the program.
Right.
The only reason I guess they wouldn't is because of political pressure from other groups.
Right.
But my call would be: what about our young people? What about our poor kids? What about parents who don't have the means to choose a school other than the public school that they have, whether that public school is excellent or average or worse?
Right. Yep.
So why do we always, why is everything stacked against those who, for no fault of their own, perhaps don't have the means? Why don't we give them the means?
Yes.
Right. So it's an historic first for us. It has the potential of being tremendously helpful, particularly in fundraising, like for foundations and education in our diocese. And we really do have to give thought to allow to really help our governors understand why this is so important and how they need to opt into this
Right.
when it becomes fully effective.
Right. Yeah, because it benefits the families and the kids. It doesn't cost the state, like you said. It doesn't have to be politicized.
Without a doubt, without
Yeah.
a doubt, no, without a doubt. But it's I mean, for as long as I've been involved in education, oh my gosh, and it's on the diocesan level, that's since 2002. That's a long time. We've
Mm.
been talking about something like this and
Wow.
has never gotten off the ground, but this year it did. So many thanks to everybody involved in the process. And my friends who are listening, learn more about it, particularly in the states where you don't have state aid or any sort of voucher, because this is something that we, please God, will all have some benefit from going forward.
This is the ECCA
Yes,
included in the bill that passed on the 4th of
yes.
July.
The
Great.
Educational Choice for Children's Act. Right,
Great.
right.
Yeah. Sounds great.
Yeah,
I didn't
absolutely.
even know that happened. So,
Oh, is that right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't. I have not been paying a lot of attention to most of the news and
Well,
politics out there.
I try to avoid the news too because I will slip into Great Depression. But I mean, this was worth following.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
this
great.
really was worth following. Absolutely. Um, the other thing I was thinking about, I read this article, which is extraordinary in its accomplishment of what happened in medicine, what's potential in medicine. But it also illustrates the underside of when technology moves forward. We have to take great care to use it in a moral way and to use it in a way that really benefits the people it's intended to benefit. So, do you remember hearing about an historic breakthrough technique where, with genetic editing, a young boy, I forget how many months old he is, born with a very rare chromosome defect, that because I think it was in Philadelphia, the doctors, along with some people from a university, I believe it was the University of Pennsylvania or Penn State, they were able to adjust, if I may use the word heal, correct the defect through genetic editing so that the boy now is slowly recovering and overcoming what would have been potentially a fatal condition.
Wow.
Right? It's called the CRISPR gene therapy. So this boy now is promised a healthy life because genetic engineering, if I could use it that, was used for to specifically address a disease and help him to heal from that. It's remarkable. It's
Yeah.
remarkable what can be done, right? So on one hand, we sit back and we celebrate that. And the fact that all the genius that goes into that, and it is genius. I mean, I could barely spell it, never mind try to understand how it's done. But there are some really dedicated, bright people, doctors, physicians, researchers, who could actually drill down to the chromosome itself, and through therapy be able to, in some way, mitigate its effect. I'm going to use the word heal because it's the easy
Yes.
way to understand.
Right.
And this boy now has a new lease on life.
Wow.
Right. On the flip side, that same technology can be used to do awful things. You know, I remember when I was much younger, they talked about designer babies. and that you could pick and choose what you wanted your child to look like, what color hair, what color eyes. And I'm thinking to myself, these people are out of their minds.
Right.
But in fact, that same technology, right, in that same family of genetic, I'm going to say engineering, genetic editing, as a baby is literally growing, right, after gestation, you can change, you can literally create a child in whatever image you want, which I think is horrifying,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
That unfortunately is something that, like, without formation, a parent might say, "What's wrong with it?" Like, I'm not doing anything um, bad to somebody else. But I mean, that's seems like a very illicit use.
Well, if we were to drill down into it, first and foremost, I'm sure this technique for this young boy was extraordinarily expensive.
Hmm.
And therefore, there is, forgive me for being frank, but there's profit to be made. And in this case, for this young boy, that profit was well worth the price because this boy was healed,
Yes.
right?
Right.
But then there's a market and profit to be made in create and using a similar technology, but as gene manipulation to be able to create children that are designer because you want him to be smarter, faster, handsome, she to be beautiful, attractive, articulate, can sing. And we've gotten to the point where a lot of that can actually be mapped out. Could you imagine, Steve, particularly those who have the means, how lucrative a business that would be?
That's
Taking the
unfortunately.
guesswork out of everything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what are we doing in the end? What we're doing in the end is playing God. And we're playing with fire, not only because of the artificiality of it, not only because you're robbing the person the natural rights to make choices that you're making for them,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But it's a slippery slope.
Yes. Yeah. Also, what do you think of this idea that, and I haven't thought it through, this is my first time thinking about this, but the idea that then as a parent, you're not necessarily loving your kid for who your kid is with all his or her flaws, etc., but you're loving this
Your
menu.
creation, your
Yeah,
creation,
right.
your creation. Absolutely. That's part of it. And the other thing that's deeply disturbing to me is that not only would you have such an extraordinary intervention in the dignity and in the reality and in the freedom of another human being, but what prevents down the road an agency other than parents or an agency that has no relation to the person at all making the same decisions? So, what about if the state decided there's too many people and therefore let's just do some genetic manipulation so that, a person becomes sterile at 30
Hmm. Right.
for the greater good, right? Or worse, in history, we saw this experimentation that the Nazis did. And what was that for? That was for what? Creating what? A pure society? What does that mean?
Right.
So you would you put this is terrible for me to say, but I'm old now. Would you put a gun in the hand of a child? Of course not.
Right.
Well, you could be extraordinarily bright, and I hope I don't offend anyone. You could be extraordinarily bright and gifted in your profession, so you can do this work. But it doesn't mean that you're mature ethically or morally or even socially.
Yes.
And then what do? You're putting kind of a power in someone's hands who may not have the guardrails to say, well, wait a minute though. Well, why are we doing this? To what greater good, either for the person or society? What and you can unleash forces that the person may not even realize he or she is unleashing.
Yep. This is the start of so many like horrific sci-fi books and movies.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. And therefore, the question is, how is it regulated? Which then leads to another topic. And the topic is Pope Leo has been speaking about this at great length to his great credit, which is artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I am no expert in artificial intelligence. There are many who are listening who could explain it far better than I can. I'm not here to try to explain what it is so much as I'm trying to tease out what it can do and its effect. So, who does not use AI now? You do a Google search. Every time I do a Google search, it's AI
Right.
generated, isn't it?
Right. Yes. Yep.
Right? And it's remarkable of what it can give us. So once again, I think artificial intelligence is a blessing. It holds tremendous potential. And even in something as diagnosing disease, it can be a tremendous tool in the hands of doctors and nurses and surgeons to verify their own diagnoses. But now, the flip side, artificial intelligence also can easily tempt a person to forego the need to learn the skills and undergo the training to be able to navigate the world without its help.
Mm-hmm.
So we discussed this when I was a kid when we had computers and not on our phones. Could you use those in school? Then we went to laptops and now we have artificial intelligence. And so the question becomes, how does that humanize me? Well, one of the ways it does not humanize me is if I allow it to do all the work for me and I am unable to do it for myself. That creates a dependency, which, quite frankly, can lead to more dire consequences. There's almost an addiction or enslavement to it because
Mm-hmm.
if I don't ask them to do it, I don't know how to research. I don't even know where to go,
Right. Yeah.
right? And then, like everything else, artificial intelligence is only as good as the source materials from which it comes. So, how do we know the fonts from which a search engine that uses artificial intelligence, what sources they are using to gather the material? And I think in the end, that's something that goes to the very heart of the objectivity of truth, which already is under attack in secularism because the truth has become relative, in my opinion. But now we have artificial intelligence that tells us these are the results of my search. And I'm guessing a majority of people, if not an absolute majority of people, say, okay, so that's what it is.
Yeah.
But if I'm only looking at 10 of the 25 volumes, I'm only getting part of the story. And then the other piece, which we've talked about already, is for artificial intelligence, is how it can displace the human factor in work, in labor, in duties and responsibilities. I was sent an article. So let me give you a conundrum. Okay. I was sent an article that says that lining up doctors and artificial intelligence and giving them the exact same information, that artificial intelligence is actually more accurate in diagnosing disease than the human doctors.
Hmm.
Now, I'm not sure if that's true or not, but
Mm-hmm.
let's say for the case of the conundrum, it is true.
Sure.
What would you do? Would you continue to go to a human doctor or would you just load everything yourself and get the diagnoses on your screen?
Right. Yeah.
And you, my friend, what would you do?
I mean, the I think the trend would be to go to the screen.
Right, right. And the screen doesn't have intuition,
Yes.
doesn't have common sense, and doesn't have the personal relationship that a doctor needs to have, especially if you have a primary care physician who gets to know you,
Right.
who can intuit that which artificial intelligence could never know.
Yeah.
So, in my perfect world, which I'll never have, a doctor or someone, a lawyer or an accountant using artificial intelligence could use it as to check for its work, but not to substitute for them.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the great fear that is now evolving in certain circles in the church, even in Rome, because remember, economically, the developed world went to the developing world for cheap labor. That is why when you call a bank, oftentimes you are offshore to another country
Right.
because they pay those individuals a fraction of the cost. Now, ask yourself the question, what happens if I buy a program and it does it for free? Then what happens?
Mm-hmm.
Where do those individuals in the developing world find employment? And quite frankly, where do some people in our own country find employment? Like proofreaders, editors, bookkeepers. I could go on and on.
Yeah.
So there's there is enormous benefit and there's enormous dislocation and quite frankly temptations to dehumanize or to make irrelevant the human factor, which have profound consequences on society. That's why Pope Leo keeps talking about it.
Yeah. Right. If only there was a voice out there in the world to be the beacon of morality.
And to be able to legislate the guardrails.
Yes. That's the second part is because obviously I'm being facetious and the Catholic Church is there to do that, but it's we don't have the legislative authority in government, and probably rightly
Right,
so in many
right.
cases, but we also, like, people don't listen to the church anymore.
Well, it's because unfortunately, um, I think its message is so countercultural that in order to take it seriously, it requires a real complete examination of one's life. Most people are comfortable in what they are doing, even if it's doing them harm. Isn't that
Hmm.
interesting?
Yeah.
Right? It takes effort to convert, to change, right? To have metanoia.
Yes.
But the other is, I think, because of how we've conducted ourselves, I think we have squandered some of the trust we could have had and used to have, and we have to rebuild that. So
Right.
we're in the rebuilding phase of that.
Yes. Yes.
But I think we have to follow carefully what Pope Leo is going to be teaching us in this regard, and what the Magisterium is going to be teaching us in this regard, because has epical change
Hmm.
potential,
Hmm.
and it's not all going to be for the better, not all for the good. And speaking of legislation, then, and how you regulate legislation, there is another bit of news that I'm not exactly sure if it has been resolved. I went online, but because I don't have my glasses, I can't read the screen very well. So I was hoping to have the answer here, so our listeners could call it in. But in New York State, they passed the what's called the Medical Care for the Dying Act, and the legislature passed it, and it's sitting on the desk of the governor. And it basically is a euthanasia bill. It is assisted suicide.
So it's not actually medical care. It's
Well, it's couched that way, but it's
right.
actually not.
Oh
No.
my gosh.
And
Okay.
this is how it got passed. This is extremely important. It got passed because it was couched in this false sense of, well, this is mercy. And we're going to tend to the person's needs and their freedom and responsibility. So, what are the provisions? You have to be over 18 years of age. You have to be terminally ill with the diagnosis that you have 6 months or less to live. You need two physicians to certify that that is two separate, that is the actual diagnosis. That the person has to prove that they are capable of making the decision freely, so there's no constraint, and that it's self administered. Now, one could look at that and say, okay, well, basically, it's by his own hand, he's free, two doctors have said it, this is irreversible. Sounds reasonable. No, it doesn't. Let me just say that point blank. No, it
Right.
doesn't. Because for many reasons, we could go through some of them now, and at the break, we could go through the others. But first and foremost, the fact that one is making that decision precludes the possibility that there can be an intervention that has not been thought of, that has not been identified, that frankly hasn't even been created, that could mitigate the terminal nature of the illness. So it is a direct attack, in my humble opinion, on hope.
Yes. Yep.
And hope, as we know, is not hope that I'm going to be healed, is that hope is that I keep my eyes fixed on the pilgrimage to heaven.
Yes.
And to assist in one's own killing is a grave sin. It is a mortal sin. And if you're conscious of what you're doing, then you can't even, the bill actually guarantees in some sense, if you actually define it, that this person is culpable for what they're doing,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. We do need to take a quick break, Excellency, but yeah, it's so sad because like also in those 6 months, like that's still your life. So
Without a doubt. We'll talk about it more at the other side.
okay. All right. So this is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network, and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. Excellency. So
Let's go back to the act, right, in New York State.
Yeah.
But there's also, it's false advertising. It's considered to be merciful, but it's not merciful to rob someone of the remaining time that God has given them, and the hope that would be engendered in that, to make peace with God so that you're ready to go into, please God, the glory that is promised to us. Plus, I go back to the slippery slope. There are many states that have done this, where they have loosened these restrictions. Because once again, this is a terrible thing for me to say, but I am who I am, and I call it like it is. But this is just, in many ways, with some perhaps mistaken intentions on some people who advocate for it, thinking this is merciful. This is just a way to save money.
Yeah.
This is just a way to say, in the next 6 months, you're going to cost us a fortune. So why don't we just give you these things and just call it a day? Right? Now, maybe I'm wrong, but no one can tell me that money does not have a factor in this in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And it just horrifies me to think that for all the resources we have and the ability for us to mitigate pain so that a person can live peacefully, relatively pain-free, even in a terminal illness, and to spend time with their relatives and their friends, then to be able to do that in such a way, that makes preeminent sense. And if it's going to say, well, Caggiano, but what happens if you have no friends? If you're basically alone, if a life has all been a struggle, and therefore, you know, what is there the 6 months to look forward to? And then my response back to it, that's the clarion call for the church to step in. This whole talk about accompaniment and pastoral ministers of the sick, right? No one should face terminal illness alone. And if their family doesn't care, or they don't have family, or they have no friends, then that is where the church has to stand up and say, we oppose this bill, but we also need to walk with people so that they're not alone and they're not hopeless in the natural course of their life. We can't have
Yeah.
it both ways either, right?
And whether you have 60 years left or 6 months left or 6 days left, your life has value.
Oh, well, incalculable value. I mean, it has value that's beyond price. Absolutely. And you look at all the great saints, many of them, Carlo Acutis, right? I mean, they all, at the end, many of them had suffered tremendously. But what did they do? They offered it as an opportunity for purification,
Yeah.
right? To be able to ready themselves for the glory of heaven.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have no idea if the governor signed that bill. I pray every day that a Catholic background somewhere will help her to say, this is not the way to go.
Yeah.
Then there's this whole question about the evolution of the battle to protect life. This is a life issue,
Yes,
isn't
definitely.
it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if we look at life and how the church teaches the value, the irrepeatable value of every human life from conception to natural death, and the attacks, then they're becoming a lot more subtle and a lot more available. And in many ways, people do not necessarily have the tools to be able to respond correctly so that they don't even inadvertently fall into the trap of not defending, protecting, valuing, and respecting every human life. So you may say, well, Bishop, what are you talking about? Well, just one subgroup of a consequence of in vitro fertilization. Now, many people use in vitro fertilization. It arises, I think, many times from this desire to have children. And of course, that desire is a noble one.
Mm-hmm.
And in every married couple, please God, there is that desire to have that. But the truth is, in vitro fertilization is not approved by the church, not because it's frowning on the desire, but because it breaks the relationship between the unitive and the procreative aspects of marriage. It allows technology to work on the procreative piece. Now, we've talked, technology has a role in everything when it is guarded and there are parameters and guidelines that allow it to be ethical. But you know that in vitro fertilization, there is a form of it where a husband and wife are married and they use their own egg and sperm. And then there are all the different variations of you go outside of marriage, right, to do that. All of these have ethical consequences, right? If you make the choice to do it, you've already crossed the boundary, all right? And so the ethical. Now, what I just read, I met someone that I think, Steve, we should invite on our show, who's part of the St. Luke Guild Advisory Board. She is a moralist and an ethical professor, Catholic through and through,
Mm-hmm.
that over the last 20 years has made a speciality the whole question of the respect, defense, and protection of embryos. That is, once an egg and sperm are fertilized. You may say, well, that's interesting. Well, the church teaches that once fertilization occurs, that embryo is a human life.
Right.
And there has been a practice that has arisen that is fascinating because it's almost not alluded to, but is morally devastating. And what is that? So, ordinarily speaking, when in vitro fertilization occurs, that in common practice now, many times, because it is so expensive and because people are really trying to have children in this way, that a number of eggs are fertilized with sperm. And therefore, only a few are implanted in the uterus of a mother. So the question is, what happens with the rest of them? Everyone that is fertilized is the beginning of human life. It is human life. It's a human person. It's very first stages of life. And the practice that has occurred is that for many, they're just disposed of, which is abortive. That's abortion.
Yes.
But for some, they're actually frozen. and they're kept for possible later use, either by the couple or another couple. So now you have a human life at its earliest state frozen. Who would have thought such a thing 30, 40 years ago? And so, what's our response to that as a church? What's our response, our ethical and moral response to that? Right? Well, we know, we believe that that's a human life, and that life needs to be respected and defended. The fact that it would be transferred, okay, from let's say a surrogate mother to a natural mother is itself morally unacceptable, because you're taking a life, right, and as if it was just a commodity.
Hmm.
But the truth is, in this case, those embryos need to be protected. And when they are frozen, it can do them harm. So we're harming these individuals. And the real question is, can they be adopted? And the answer is yes, they can be. They can be adopted because you recognize they're a human life,
Right.
and they're given to a mother to bear, right, and brought into the world and cared for and loved as her own child, or as a couple's child. And that is a ministry that is beginning to grow in the life of the church,
Wow.
because there are some estimates that there are potentially tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, potentially more than that, embryos totally fertilized, frozen, literally in limbo. And so it's fascinating. We must invite this person on our podcast
Yes.
because she explained
Okay.
this far better than I. I'm teasing the topic, but I just found it fascinating to listen. Like, for example, Germany and Italy have outlawed the freezing of embryos, have outlawed, in Italy in particular, that they could be the insemination of an egg apart from the husband married to the wife. It outlaws surrogate motherhood, and it outlaws any form of artificial womb, because when an embryo is fertilized and frozen, it doesn't have the benefit of the mother as its
And
protector,
yeah.
as the womb to gestate in, to create that psychological connection. I mean, it's but do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
When she comes, she'll explain this in greater detail. But most people, like myself included, I wouldn't give much of this a thought, because it's like so much on the outskirts of what we consider ordinary life, in the sense that you don't give thought to, and yet this has enormous moral and ethical implications that are going on.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, I just think in the end, um, I've always joked that I don't like to watch the news because it is depressing, but there is a moral obligation for believers to stay in tune with the news, because there is good news, there is challenging news, there's really disturbing news, but all of it affects the life of faith, and all of it affects the life of how you and I live in the marketplace and in the public square.
Yes.
So did I depress you with all these topics?
No, it's I just can't believe how much life is becoming like
A commodity.
science. Yeah, and society is becoming like science fiction.
Yeah. And we have an obligation to know it, and we have an obligation to respond to it. Right?
Yes. Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. The response is so important because once you are made aware, you cannot just
Hmm.
sit
Hmm.
by.
Hmm. Hmm. And the other thing, too, if I may, to end, this may be like one of our more controversial episodes, but the truth of the matter is, even in the evolution now that's going on, with how we're dealing with the immigration and migrants and the needs of migrants in our own midst, that is ultimately a life question,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because in the end, it is a false choice, as I've said, to choose having a law abiding country and to be a welcoming country that is hospitable to people who are escaping poverty, economic instability, and worse, right, in the political world. It's our failure that we have not created laws and enforced them in such a way that we keep an open door to everyone here. But that's a question that is above my pay grade, although I do have definite opinions about that. But for the people who are present in our midst, how things are done, how they are treated, has enormous moral consequence, right?
Yeah.
And for us just to sit by and say nothing is not an acceptable stance. Always avoiding false choices, always avoiding false choices,
Right.
right? So the whole spectrum, whether it's education, whether it's the ability to live in peace, right? Or to have the opportunity, if you need to go home, if you have to go home, then go home, but go home in a humane way too, right?
Mm-hmm.
To be able to respect life when it's conceived, life when it's in its natural terminus. I mean, it's such a complicated issue. And summer is the time to reflect, isn't it? So I put it out there for the people who are listening to kind of give thought and maybe spend some time online to read about these things, because our congressmen are passing laws and I wonder if they're reading it.
It's the life issue. It feels like it keeps getting worse and going against us in broader and deeper and more numerous ways. Every year, it feels like this. Uh, I don't have a point or necessarily a question. It's just that just dawned on me, and it's
Yeah, I think it's I'm not sure if it's worse because the challenges are coming faster and faster. But I think, for example, in the fight against abortion, our young people are getting it. That's real progress, right?
right.
That's progress that we should celebrate. And they're no different than their peers. So there is progress. But then as soon as you make progress in one area, another area comes up that you never even thought of. And of everything we talked about, I think the one that worries me the most is the rise of euthanasia in our society, because we are hurtling towards a debt in our country that is unsustainable. There are pressures in medical care because it's becoming more and more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Resources are not infinite. And therefore, as I said before, there's going to be this subtext that says, so Frank Caggiano has 4 months to live. And quite frankly, he's going to be in some pain. We can mitigate that, but that costs money. And all the treatment and everything else, that costs money. And he could run up $3 million in 4 months. And he's still going to die. So what's the point? Right?
Yeah.
And that's a tremendous fear on my part, that that's just going to rule the roost.
Yeah. Yep.
The other thing too that I want people to think about, since I'm giving everyone homework now, right, to look up all these topics, is what is the baseline of what is humane? What is the environment that makes a human thrive? What are the essential ingredients that allows for a healthy, vibrant, and I would like to throw in holy life? Have you ever heard someone actually entertain that question? And therefore, don't you think the time has come for us to have that question
Yeah. Right.
debated? Because it's such an obvious question that people operate out of their presumptions. But if we had a conversation, we may be surprised that people across religions and even who are secular may actually agree more than we realize.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's when politicians begin to take notice. But the oldest strategy is divide and conquer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're ripe for that. That's one of the things in my mind that I'm debating how we can engage this across the spectrum,
Yeah.
right? Not just in the church, because in the church we're clear as to how we would answer those questions, but
Right.
to engage people of other faiths and people with no organized religious faith. We used to talk about the common good. Maybe that's another way of asking the question: can we agree on the common good? Because if we do that, then some of these questions would have natural barriers, natural parameters, guardrails.
Yes. Yes.
Hmm.
We yeah. We need education within the faithful of the church too, because normal people like me don't understand all the issues either. And so yeah, it's gosh, so much.
But you know what, Steve? There's a logic to faith,
Yes.
and so everything rises and falls with the joy of the gospel, as Francis told us over and over again, with the revelation of the Lord Jesus, who is God made man, revealing a God who is a trinity of community of love, who by his death and resurrection has freed us from sin and death, that is, healed us from the inside out, a man like us in all things and sin. And the benefit that he incurred in his life is given to us through the power of the Holy Spirit, in the grace of baptism, and in the sacraments given us, those unique moments of encounter with Christ's power, ultimately in the Eucharist, where he dwells within us, even our stomachs. That's the summary of our faith. If everyone dwells on that, everything else, as complicated as it is, can be thought through. And if you don't get chapter and verse, you'll get the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And many times that's all we need,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
right?
Yeah.
So I think the divide and conquer strategy has to be revealed for what it is. It's a waste of time. So I offer these topics because they're current, they're in the news, they're extremely important. They affect the life of discipleship, they affect our society and the common good. And everyone needs to know about this and take a stand and make that stand known. Having said all that, it's all flows from the basics of our faith. So if you don't read the catechism and you just meditate on what I just said and really in prayer meditate, a lot of this becomes kind of self-evident, right?
Yes. That's an awesome way to launch into the final break.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so this is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network, and we will be back with a listener question. Okay, welcome back to Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. Excellency, that was a heavy but important conversation.
Well, it's good. Yeah, I think it's going to invite people to have a gin and tonic and think through some of this stuff.
Well, we have a question that came in from overseas, and so I'll just read you actually the entire email. It says, "Hello, here's my question to Bishop Caggiano. Since God created a perfect world, nature, science, physics, perfect mechanism, how do you explain the existence of genetic diseases, harmful gene mutations, genetic disorders, etc.? With greetings and prayers from Poland."
Oh, wow.
And she wrote her name here. It says Agnieszka.
Steve, you are famous.
Yeah, right. Yeah, everybody tunes in for me. Yep.
No. All right. So the insight is an excellent one. God did create a world in Eden that was in balance and harmony with natural happiness. And because of the fall, disorder entered into creation. And therefore, that disorder manifests itself in many different ways, including that sort of genetic disorder, right? So it's not the result of, it's not the culpability of the sin of the person, no, but it's the consequence of creation itself being harmed by the original sin. And we believe that in the final judgment, creation itself will be healed. St. Paul says that. And all of this disorder will be healed. And it won't be a natural happiness, it will be a supernatural happiness. Right? So the best is yet to come, but it is a consequence of the disorder that, unfortunately, humanity invited in
Yeah.
at the beginning.
That's a great question. So if you have a question for Bishop Frank, you can send it in on social media, or you can email questions@veritascatholic.com. You can find Bishop Frank Caggiano and also Veritas Catholic Network on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Let Me Be Frank is brought to you by a grant from Foundations in Faith, and specifically the St. Therese Fund for Evangelization. Foundations in Faith is committed to supporting and transforming pastoral ministries in the Diocese of Bridgeport, and you can learn more about their work at foundationsinfaith.org. Okay, so we have homework, summer homework, summer reading.
Yes, we have homework to do. I'm going to quiz you next time we're together. Anyway,
so
enjoy
then-
your time, my friend. We are going to record our next episode. I will be in Rome. So we're going to try to do this transatlantically with the seminarians on pilgrimage, which will be a riot.
Awesome.
It'll be an absolute, we will have a great time. So there'll be a totally different perspective of what we had today. I'll give you the sights, the sounds, and the tastes
Yes.
of Rome when next we're together.
Hopefully you'll have some funny stories.
Yes,
about
absolutely.
seminaries. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, safe travels, Excellency, and
Thank you.
hope you get some rest.
Thank you.
Maybe with the guys there.
Yeah.
And would you please give us your blessing?
Of course. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. We give you thanks, O Lord our God, for continuing to walk with us in your merciful love in the very complicated and complex and challenging world that is evolving before us. Help us to understand those challenges, to not run from them. Help us to address them faithfully, simply with the word of faith that comes in your Son Jesus. Help us to persevere and be zealous. Help us always to be faithful. And we ask that your Holy Spirit bless all who are listening to us this day. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, my friend.
Okay, Excellency.
Enjoy.
See you next time.
Ciao.
Thanks for watching. Before you go, please be sure to subscribe, like, hit the bell, leave a comment down below. All of that stuff helps us reach more souls.